Hello everyone, and welcome to the first module. The first module corresponds to the chapter 1 in the textbook. Our course will be connected with the textbook pretty closely. All you need to pass the final and the midterm you can find in the textbook. But let me highlight the most important ideas. Let's start with the ways we acquire our knowledge. Just to be sure, none of these ways are bad and none of these ways are especially good. All people use all the 5 ways, and I'm not here to criticize you or somebody else. Let's start with the intuition or the gut feeling. Have you ever made some decision just listening to your gut? I will be very surprised if you say no. When we listen to our intuition, we can make some decision pretty easily and pretty fast, and not each decision needs a long time to think about it. The problem is, our intuition is very biased. What does that mean? Well, imagine you have problems with public speaking, and you have to present some slides. You stand before board and look at the faces of your fellow students. Almost none are looking at you, and some who are looking are pretty bored. Well, why? Maybe because you are a boring person, or maybe because they don't like you. Well, actually no, it's just your bias speaking. Your fellow students may be not bored at all, or maybe if they are bored with the class, with your teacher. Or maybe they are just preoccupied with their own thoughts. That makes more sense, right? So think about it when you just listen to your gut. The second way of knowing is listening to the authority. We are pretty good in this, right? We listen to our teachers, we listen to our parents, and at least to some point, we listen to our politicians. Is that always good? Well, sometimes. I think each of you knows at least one person who was not feeling well, went to the doctor, and the doctor tells them that this is not a real illness. They should just relax, drink some tea, maybe sleep a little bit more. This makes sense, right? But after this person hasn't stopped feeling badly, they went to another doctor and maybe to the third one. And only after some time they got the real diagnosis. So, does it mean that authorities are always wrong? No, it doesn't. But it's better to have in mind that everybody has its own interest in mind and not yours. Please continue to advocate to yourself. The third way of knowing is rationalism. This is when we use our logic and reasoning to acquire new knowledge. It usually works pretty well, but when the premises are not correct, the knowledge will be not correct as well. One example from the everyday life. Let's say we need to buy cereal. We go to a shop and try to compare prices per gram, maybe calories, and maybe amount of sugar in cereal. When we buy the best cereal, well, this is how we use rationalism in our everyday life decision. The fourth method of knowing is empirism. Empirism is at the heart of the scientific method because in science we rely on observations. But not just in science. From the first days of our life, we learn our world using empirism. We try ice cream from the first time and learn that it is tasty. And maybe we try something else, like, I don't know, strange cheese, and learn that it is not tasty and we shouldn't try it again. And of course, the fifth method, how we got our knowledge, is a scientific method. Well, scientific method is a process of systematically collecting and evaluating evidence to test ideas and answer questions. Of course, scientific method has its own disadvantages. Let's start with the time and resources we need to answer some question. To answer some scientific question, you need to read a lot of literature, communicate with your colleagues, write a hypothesis, collect some data, test some data. That's a lot of time. Another thing is, you cannot test all the hypotheses. You cannot travel in time and see what actually happened. Or you cannot do something because of ethical questions. Also, science has its own problems. There are plenty of them. Science got engaged in some questionable research practices. I will link a video about that. Understanding science. Psychology is a science, like biology, chemistry, or physics. Psychology, as another science, uses observations and experiments to understand the natural world, which means that psychology uses the scientific approach. The scientific approach has three components. The first one is systematic empirism. In the textbook example, researchers have not relied on the stereotypes. They do rely on the scientific methods such as observation. Another important feature of science is to address empirical questions. Empirical questions can be answered by systematically observing something. Not all questions can be modified into empirical questions. Continue on the topic of gender stereotypes. We can answer the question, who has more traffic accidents, women or men? But we cannot answer the question, who are better drivers? Because being a better driver is something that cannot be measured. The third feature of science is to create a public knowledge. This is a part many scientists try to forget about. After the empirical question was asked, subjects were tested, statistics were done, scientists published their data in professional journals. There is a long way for knowledge to transfer from professional journal to a knowledge of common folk. Sometimes this knowledge can change a bit while transferring. This is why it is very important for scientists to step out from the university labs and conference and promote their knowledge among common folk. Why? Because there is a pseudoscience. There are a lot of examples of pseudoscience. Astrology, healing crystal, you can name a lot. Pseudoscience usually are very believable, but it can be a very harmful thing. How can we distinguish between science and pseudoscience? Well, pretty easily. Pseudoscience usually lacks one or even more features of the science. I put a table from another textbook. in the PowerPoint. It is pretty useful information of how to distinguish something that looks pretty much scientific from a science. Please stay skeptical. Let's continue with the 3 goals of science. The first goal is to describe. Let me take example from my own studies. I am a developmental researcher and I usually work with infants, meaning babies from the birth up to 12 months of age. And I usually use an eye tracker. So my study looks very similar to this photo. For example, I can be interested how many faces do infants see in their normal life. In this case, I can ask parents to put a GoPro cam on the infant's head to collect the data. Then I can look through the footage and count how many different faces does one infant see in their normal day. Well, usually not many, and usually this is just the members of the infant's family. The next goal is to predict. For example, there were made a lot of studies by my colleagues and me who showed that bilingual raised kids have better face recognition when they are getting older. So, using the data from those studies and getting the information about infant, if this infant were raised in bilingual or monolingual family, I can predict if they will be better in face perception. And the third goal is to explain why are infants who were raised bilingual are better in face recognition. Well, this is a question that we still have to answer. Does anybody have any ideas why that can be? I really hope one of you will find an answer to this question someday. Let's speak about one classification of the research. You can divide all the research into 2 categories: a basic research and applied research. A basic research is conducted for the sake of achieving more detailed and accurate understanding of human behavior. For example, I am a basic researcher. In my studies, for example, I research where do Caucasian infants look when they look at Caucasian or Asian faces. And there are also applied researchers. Applied research is conducted to address some practical problem. A good example will be if the using of a cell phone is disturbing while driving, or if I would like to continue my research in a more applied way, using the data I already have, I can create a training for children to help them distinguish between faces they are rarely occur in their life. Science and common sense. Also, a lot of insight for scientific psychology comes from a folk psychology. It is very important to discriminate among them. I think we all share the experience when people, knowing that we studying psychology, ask us if something is correct. For example, is it true that we only use 10% of our brain? Or that people, especially babies, behave themselves much worse during a full moon? Well, these 2 facts as much as many other ones are not true. I was pretty advanced in my career when I learned that there is no such things as learning styles. The whole time when I was a student myself, I was thinking that all my problems in studying was caused by discrepancy between my studying style and the studying style of my teacher. There should be another reason. Maybe you got surprised as well when you read some example in the textbook. So why folk psychology existed? One answer is a confirmation bias. It's very easy to see something that confirms your beliefs, and it's very easy to ignore something that not confirms your belief. When I was a high school student, I thought that all very attractive girls are very mean. Was I right? Of course not. But I have confirmation biases, and each time I saw a mean attractive girl, I remember that. And all other possibilities, like nice attractive girls or mean, well, maybe not that attractive girls, I ignored. It took me some effort to say goodbye to these biases. Well, how to beat your confirmation biases? One thing, try to be skeptical. Think critically about what you see, hear, and feel. Don't forget about challenging your intuition. And most important, cultivate a tolerance for uncertainty. There is and there will be a lot of things that we don't know and we will never experience. And this is fine. It will be nice to know everything and will be able to predict everything, but it's just impossible.